Right, good afternoon, everybody. We are now live. Welcome to this meeting of the Growth, Infrastructure, Planning and Economy Cabinet Panel. My name's Derek Ashley. I'm the Executive Member for Growth, Infrastructure, Planning and the Economy. And at the beginning of the meeting, as is customary with these electronic meetings, I'll make the following announcement. During the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. If you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raised hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against or abstain. I'll declare the result after each vote. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours and will be taken after a speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we are voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. And I will build in a break around about 4 o'clock or just before, rather depends where we are on the agenda, to give people the opportunity for just that break in proceedings. So just to start off the meeting, we've got 1 or 2 membership changes. Richard Smith is substituting for David Barnard and John Hale is substituting for Sandy Walkington. I'm not aware there's any other substitutions or apologies. So as is customary at the beginning of the meeting, I will run through the roll call of members just to ask them to introduce themselves for the benefit of any of the public who may be attending electronically and watching the meeting. So in the order on the order paper, Richard Smith. Is Richard with us? Oh, yes.
Sorry, Chairman, I was just muting. Yes, I'm Richard Smith and I represent the Welwyn County Division.
Sarah Bedford. Is Sarah with us? She's logged on.
Chair, there's a message in the chat which says I currently can hear but not be heard and I'm speaking with IT.
Oh, according to this, it's muted. Anyway, okay, all right. Stephen Bolton.
Hello, Stephen Bolton, member for Hatfield Rural.
Sue Featherstone.
Hello, Sue Featherstone's Stephen Division, which is south of St Albans. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Jarvis.
Steve Jarvis from Royston Western Rural and Liberal Democrat spokesman.
Asif Khan.
Asif Khan, North Watford Labour spokes for this area.
Thank you. Paul Mason.
Paul Mason, Conservative, Hoddesdon South.
Thank you. Graham McAndrew.
Graham McAndrew, Conservative, Bishop Stortford Rural.
Thank you. Adam Mitchell.
Hello, Adam Mitchell from Broadwater in Stevenage and Vice Chairman.
Thank you. Sharon Taylor.
Thank you. Sharon Taylor, Labour Councillor for Bedwell Division in Stevenage.
John Hale.
Good afternoon, Chair. John Hale, County Councillor for Coney Heath and Marswick, substituting for Sandy Walkington.
Thank you. And finally, Jane West.
Good afternoon, Jane West for the North Bushy Division.
Thank you very much, members. As is customary, beginning of
Chair, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Sorry, Sarah Bedford, Councillor for Abbots Langley.
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you.
The miracles of this is not the first time that County IT have tried to stop me speaking, and this time I have sorted it before the meeting finished.
It's all a conspiracy. Don't worry. Anyway, we I just at the customary beginning of meetings, we ask members to declare any pecuniary interest. I think Sharon, you wanted to declare some.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I need to declare a non-prejudicial interest in item 3 because I am a member of the Local Enterprise Partnership Board. A non-prejudicial interest in item 6, the rail strategy, because I'm leader of Stevenage Borough Council and the Stevenage Station development is mentioned in that. But I do need to declare a prejudicial interest in item number 9, the sustainable travel towns, and I won't take part in that part of the meeting, Chair. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Sharon. Is anyone else wish to declare any interests?
Yes,
Okay.
Chairman.
Sorry, Graham?
Councillor McAndrew, on the sustainable travel town, I'm part of the bid application for Bishop Stortford.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Graham. All right. Okay. Moving on to item 1. Sorry, Steve Jarvis, you got your hand up.
I think in the light of other members' declarations, I need to declare that I was part of a working group with Royston Town Council on Royston's sustainable travel town bid.
Okay. All right. I mean, we get to the point where I think everybody's got an interest in everything one way or another. But anyway, thank you very much indeed for that. Anyone else? I think no other hands are up. Okay. Teresa, did you want to come in on something?
No, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Item 1, minutes. First of all, invite the panel to confirm the minutes of the 8th of October. And if you could just indicate in the chat function that you're happy with the minutes, please. Right, thank you very much, members. Now, subsequent to the... Yeah, thank you. Subsequent to the minutes, we have circulated an update and actions from the 8th of October meeting. That has been placed before the panel today. And if anybody's got any follow-up to those actions, perhaps they'd like to indicate in the chat function. But there's a matter of report, basically some of the follow-ups from the last meeting. If anybody wants to actually make any comment to those, can they indicate in the chat function? And I'll take any queries. Sorry, not in the chat function, in the participants area. Put a hand up. Right. Excuse me. Public petitions, item 2, none have been received. Item 3, COVID-19 impact on Hertfordshire. Presentation from the LEP. And Neil, I think you're with us, are you?
I am, Chair.
Thank you very much. Proceed.
I do believe you have a slide deck. What I will do is give you some edited highlights of that. I recognise there's quite a few bits of data to go through, so if you allow me the liberty of just going through what I think are kind of salient points, and I'm happy to take questions either later or outside this meeting on other pieces of information.
I think that would be excellent, Neil.
Right. So again, as my usual caveat with some of this information is we're always kind of running slightly behind in terms of the data. Do you have that on your screen?
I did. It's now gone.
Hold on.
I think Jane's sharing.
Jane, are you? Oh dear. Oh.
Am I able to share?
I think Jane is sharing at the moment. Jane, are you?
Apologies.
Oh, that's better. Neil, okay, we're back.
Thank you.
Right. So again, whilst this is looking back somewhat, you know, the overall recovery over the summer was strong, but clearly we are now in a different situation in terms of just coming out of another lockdown. So all the indicators that you're sort of familiar with, I've been using over the past 6 months or so in terms of proxies for growth. You can see this is a purchasing management index, which is kind of business confidence level. clearly up until October, things beginning to slow down, and we're now in a situation of lockdown. So consumer spending, I think, is worth dwelling on in terms of, you can see recovery on most levels, probably less so in terms of social spending, as even with the kind of the schemes such as Eat Out to help out. But again, this situation is now clearly changed because we're looking at data up into October. I think the other thing, apologies for the blurry imagery, but that does bear sort of focusing on is, a lot of the trends were on their way down before COVID-19, and all this has done exacerbate. So this is data around retailer opening and closings. So you can see the kind of net change in openings and closing nationally. And so, losing a net 6,000 businesses over the beginning of 2020, I imagine that red line to be significantly higher going in the data from when we get the rest of 2020. But actually, as other commentators have said elsewhere, what this has done is just accelerate some of the challenges that we knew were coming our way anyway. So the retail being a perfect example of, we're probably getting, with what you're seeing with Debenhams and the Arcadia Group, what was probably likely going to be happening in, say, 2, 3, 4 years' time happening now. So they're the challenges ahead of us. This is some work we've been doing with Grant Thornton, and it is at the moment in confidence, but they're happy to share, around kind of looking at a composite different measures around economies, sort of measuring our overall kind of vulnerability compared to other sort of neighbouring benchmarking economies. So we look at a number of different factors around level of reserves, house price recovery, employment in risk sectors, etc., etc., etc. And as you can see, Hertfordshire is still regarded as a relatively low vulnerability and high recovery. That's not to say certain parts of our economy are vulnerable, and some places in Hertfordshire are vulnerable, but in the grand scheme of things, we are okay. And I think sometimes we sometimes forget, and I'm guilty as much as anyone, and focusing on the negatives, but our economic fundamentals are still relatively strong at this point in time. Clearly, the next area that we will be looking at in terms of data will be end of March. So we've gone back into a situation where the data is probably going to flatline, quite frankly, between now and either side of Christmas. So this is a slightly different slide from your deck that you've got, because obviously the numbers have changed, so we can give you the October unemployment rate. So essentially, again, what you're seeing is, since the sort of late summer, the level of unemployment, people on universal credit, has kind of flatlined. So we had a big spike earlier in the year, and it's kind of leveling out. But you can see there are certain areas that are higher than the national average, such as Watford and Broxbourne, and other areas that are above the sort of the county average of Stevenage, Hartsby and Dacorum. So there's still that, it's still that kind of picture of, whilst if you look at the Hertfordshire average, it's okay, and at least the numbers aren't going up, but some of our places are clearly suffering more than others. Again, this is data which is classed as commercial in confidence that we're given as a LEP, but I think it's useful just to so you can see the type of sectors that have been hardest hit in terms of redundancies over the past quarter. So unsurprisingly, accommodation and food services, distribution, interestingly manufacturing, and we're trying to get a picture on that, and professional scientific, which is again, those last two were kind of ones we're thinking, what is that? Clearly there's sensitivities around the data that can be released on that one, but we're going away and speaking to Department of Work and Pensions just to try and unpick some of that and see whether it's one or two anomalies or it's actually something. If those sectors start to deteriorate even further, then I think we would be pause for concern. Just again, some of the data we get is obviously less frequent and annual, and so the annual sort of growth rate and measurement in business stock is an annual figure. But what you can see again is that the most recent data is showing a decline in the number of businesses. It's expected to hit those categories that you would expect in terms of leisure, hospitality and retail, but we are now in a situation where particularly the levels of self-employment numbers involved there has gone down higher than the UK average. So if I can draw your attention to that percentage change column, the ones that are of note are around that increase in self-employment, and I think that touches on some of the anecdotal information we've got around the number of measures that are in place to try and support self-employed. There are still people falling through the cracks in terms of resource. We have been in discussion with district colleagues around some of the additional funding that's come through and trying to map with working with our growth hub what type of sectors and what type of businesses. So anecdotally, there are kind of businesses trapped up in the supply chains that the kind of the parent company or the main organisation in that supply chain is continuing to grow, but it's having a disproportionately negative effect on companies in the supply chain. Obviously, the other bunch that are affected are those without a rateable value property to work on. So I think that is something, again, we are getting some more granular detail on, and we need to focus on that area, because Hertfordshire's historically had more in self-employment than most areas. I think the other thing slightly worth noting is that our charitable and not-for-profit sector gained in size over the last year, which is, I think, bucks a trend nationally and regionally. And again, we are just trying to get behind some of the figures in relation to that. So again, in terms of the micro businesses, we thought we'd just focus on that for this particular update. This is the area that's most vulnerable. I think if you look at some of the industry sectors those are in, again, I would hope that there's a bit of a mixed picture, but actually, if you look at professional, scientific and technical, construction, business admin and support services, which covers a wide range of issues, including finance and marketing, etc., and ICT, those are still areas that we would hope to be fairly resilient going forward. So whilst we have seen decreases in numbers, we are still, the mass majority of our micro businesses in Hertfordshire are with sectors that are more likely to grow. Obviously retail, less so, but there are also sectors that we need to keep an eye on in terms of vulnerability. So looking forward, and again, we last presented around the recovery plan. That's still out there, and I'll talk a bit more about where we're going in relation to that. We also know the devolution white paper has been kicked into the long grass, probably post local elections now, we're understanding. CSR, I'll talk a bit about some of the announcements on the next slide, which again you didn't get, but I can do an update. And clearly the very live issue around whether we get a no trade deal, Brexit or not, is a heightened sense of nervousness for some of our employment groups. Just a couple of items to note around that CSR announcement last week. 2 sort of funding pots announced. Levelling Up Fund, which previously was kind of growth deal funding, which the LEP previously kind of managed. There's going to be what I'd call a relatively modest amount available across England in 21-22, 600 million. Now I can just put that into context. The Getting Building Fund, which the LEP was allocated just shy of 17 million earlier in the year to fund business incubation projects, etc., that was 900 million nationally. So if you're looking at fair shares of this won't be, you're not talking about a lot of money for next year, but ultimately there'll be 4 billion across that. It also indicates that it's going to be pretty much highways and infrastructure based. So it lists the type of schemes like bypasses, bus lanes, station upgrades, town centre regen. It's going to be open competition. And I think by the headline that's called Levelling Up words mean that we are, as Hertfordshire as a place, is going to be up against it, if I can be blunt, in terms of extracting significant funds out of the government for this. I think we need to have a sort of coordinated approach to this, and we're able to prioritise investment. And again, we've got a good track record previously with the LEP bidding into old previous growth pots to get more than our fair share. But I do believe the kind of the policy agenda around levelling up other parts of the country will mean this is going to be challenging to us. The other pot, some people may be aware of, UK Shared Prosperity Fund. That is essentially replacing the European funding that came into the county. So the LEP had kind of oversight of ERDF, European Regional Development Fund, and European Social Fund. Again, between 2015 onwards, that was somewhere between 55 to 60 million coming into Hertfordshire around business support, skills schemes, etc. That's obviously going to be a domestic pot now. And again, I think the criteria around that will be coming forward into the new year. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that I think we've got a bit of a job on our hands trying to make sure that we influence in this criteria so that places like Hertfordshire and quite frankly the rest of the South East are not ignored through this process. We know we've got areas of deprivation, we know we've got places that have taken a big hit economically. We need to be pushing that back to government and making sure we're not ignored. Again, just briefly, we're also looking at kind of EU exit related risks. So we were doing work around the COVID-19 related risks, which are, again, the sectors I talked about earlier. If you look at the ones that were fairly strong thus far, so pharma industry, financial services, professional services, construction, they are more risk related depending on the nature of the type of Brexit scenario we get. So if we're heading towards no deal, we'll have another set of vulnerable sectors, and where they are kind of gravitated towards certain areas, that will mean another set of vulnerability for places. So again, can't make any predictions, but we are tracking this, and obviously those places that have suffered from COVID, there might be another set of places that suffer depending on what Brexit related deal we get. So what does this mean? You know, building on the kind of the blue box, we're still in a state of flux. We're still in the middle of this now, coming back out of another lockdown, and that we're the sort of the return to furlough and other grants mean that the situation is going to be in stasis again for a few months. But I think we've got to draw our attention and focus on the long-term future. That whole kind of home and work setup, changes to city centre use. I think the LEP is trying to do some work in trying to predict what the future could be like in Hertfordshire in relation to this. Sorry to use economic terms like densification and agglomeration, but there is a fundamental issue, and I think there's actually an opportunity for places like Hertfordshire in the context of the London economy that could prove fruitful for some of our places in Hertfordshire as being sustainable, what I would call their own centres of gravity in terms of bringing in employment, bringing people working into town centres, and that line of economic viability coming from businesses and people in town centres as much as shoppers. But again, a lot of this stuff is that we're working through at the moment. So just in terms of where we're going next with the recovery plan, there's a skills strategy which we're refreshing with our colleagues in the County Council and Department of Work and Pensions. That will be going into the new year. And we've had previous skills strategies, but again, they need to be rewritten. We've just had the first draft of an enterprise strategy developed, which is going to our board next week, and we can share that with colleagues when we have a publishable version. We're also working, and this is within the auspices of our growth board frameworks, on focusing on those key growth sectors. What can we do to supercharge them? What can we do to make sure they can grow? So we're starting on a sector growth plan for film and TV and the cell and gene therapy sector. We will obviously they're the two we're focusing on first. We will obviously go through some of the other key sectors in Hertfordshire over the course of the next 6 months. But in terms of capacity, we're focused on two. And we're also focusing on some of those issues around good growth and as a result of COVID. So we've got a working group on digital, not only about connectivity, but utilisation. We're looking at low carbon and clean growth as an opportunity, both in terms of jobs, i.e. retrofitting low carbon solutions to existing housing stock, sustainable construction, etc. But also what we mean by inclusive growth in relation to some of our places that are going to need more additional help, and some of those people, such as young people, for example, we know have suffered more in terms of the labour market. What can we do in terms of incentivising local uptake of apprenticeships and things like that? So that's the work stream coming out of the recovery plan, and are still moving forward. I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Neil, thank you very much for cantering through that presentation. That's been quite useful. As I say, it was circulated with the paper, so people should be familiar with it. I'll now ask members if they want to make any contributions or questions, and I've got Richard Smith and Steve Jarvis.
Thank you very much. I'm Neil. I may have missed it, but have you anything to say about what may be happening in agriculture in Hertfordshire over the years to come?
Thus far, the sector has been proven to be more resilient. So you probably didn't see it in the chart that looked at the kind of the Brexit and the COVID-19 resilience. So in the context of the pandemic response, it's been relatively strong. Clearly, depending on the nature of what EU exit we get, that will have a more significant impact on the sector. So again, it's hard to predict. I think some of the work we're doing in terms of investments into Rothamsted, I think that the issue of food security and changing supply chains and food patterns, I think there's something that we can contribute there nationally with the capabilities we've got. But in terms of the overall outlook for the sector, it's challenging, and until we have some clarity over what the deal or lack of deal looks like, it's going to be a different one to answer, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Neil. Steve?
Thanks. Neil, when you were looking at vulnerability and recovery, you were comparing Hertfordshire with other parts of the UK. But in most of the sectors that offer an opportunity for real growth in Hertfordshire, they're not just businesses that deal with the UK. Isn't it also important to look at our vulnerability and recovery prospects against particularly the rest of Europe? Despite what may happen in January, there's still going to be lots of business done there, particularly in areas like aerospace and pharmaceuticals. So don't we need to be looking beyond how we sit beyond the UK as well as within the UK?
Yes, you're right there, Stephen. I think part of what's coming out of these sector growth plans is that more granular look about the reach they have and the vulnerability or not, as the case may be. So as you talked about advanced manufacturing, clearly aerospace and the space sector, which has been powering through, as it were, with Airbus and MBDA, there are vulnerabilities there. If, depending on what nature of the EU exit deal we get, I think that is safe to say. And likewise, some of the issues around life sciences and that proximity and the collaboration in terms of R&D, I think they are potentially areas of concern and risk. So you're right that we are factoring those issues in. I think the other issue, based on the point you're making, is a lot of member states are thinking about kind of shrinking supply chains and having more sustainable supply chains domestically. And likewise, some of those conversations I'm privy to happening in the UK. And there are pros and cons of those, depending on the sector. So, for looking at something like the cell and gene sector, the reason it's located in Stevenage is proximity to airports and the European networks that sector provides. So that will be a challenge. So there will be, I think you'll see some of that in more detail as we work through the sector action plans in terms of overall international comparators. But again, I think, to stay on the positive side, if you look what's happening with film and TV, big investment going in there, not just in Hertfordshire, but extra money going into Pinewood, new studios going up in the Essex-London border. I think some of our sectors are reaching a critical mass that we can kind of demonstrate they will be less vulnerable to overseas influence going forward. And I think those are why we've chosen those two sectors to do the action plans first. So it will be a factor, but it will be probably featured in the sector action plans.
Okay, Stephen Bolton.
Thank you. Just looking at a couple of early slides on unemployment and redundancies, and then taking that forward. The unemployment rate, I've assumed, is based on unemployed people in Hertfordshire. The redundancy rate, I assume, is firms in Hertfordshire that have made people redundant. But those people who are unemployed in Hertfordshire may have had jobs in London or other places that they commute to. Going forward, with the effect of COVID on London, and indeed Brexit may have on London, some of our unemployment of people living in Hertfordshire may be out of our control, in as much as it is of people who did work outside of Hertfordshire. I just wonder how, going forward, we will have to counter some of the lost work for commuters by trying to deal with additional work for people staying within the county?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. In terms of you're right, in terms of the register of unemployment is with local offices, so it features in terms of locality, and we simply do not know, which is why I've sort of caveated a lot of what I've said in terms of we will really know in evidence terms more when the furlough scheme finally ends and we know what the state of the economy is. So, but having said that, if you look at anecdotally the kind of sectors that the majority of people that commute into London are doing and are actually doing remotely, I think there is a more, hopefully, the eternal optimist in me says there's a more of a positive picture in actually them retaining their work and essentially working from home a lot more than they're doing at the moment. Well, not that they're doing at the moment, but rather than going back and getting back onto commuting 5 days a week, they'll be working from home. They'll be looking at one of the issues that we're speaking to a few partners around is investing in some sort of shared space locations in some of our town centres. So there are areas where people can work and meet colleagues, etc., that don't have to go into London. I actually think the type of jobs that a number of those people that would normally commute are involved in have been able to carry on. Obviously not in retail, not in the supply chain in terms of leisure and hospitality for people that commute and do those jobs in London, but the higher value sectors, they have been resilient, and there are about a third of our workforce commutes to London as a proxy. The vast majority of those are continuing to work remotely and doing what we're doing right now. So I'd be more optimistic. I think the opportunity for Hertfordshire is, can we get more of those people to also stay in Hertfordshire, possibly work in locations in Hertfordshire, as opposed to going to London 5 days a week, maybe go to London once a week. And we can provide locations for them to work, meet colleagues, etc., and actually use that as a viable way forward to sustain some of our town centres going forward.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Stephen.
Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands, so I'm going to ask everybody just to indicate in the chat function that they're happy to note the presentation from Neil. And once again, thanks very much for Neil for the presentation.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, colleagues. We'll move on to item 4, Integrated Transport Unit Update Presentation Report. This is from Andrew Highfield, Head of the Integrated Transport Unit, and an update of his views of where we got to and progress that we're making. So, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Derek. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. Hopefully the slides have now come on the screen. Have they, Derek? Can you?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, thanks for having me. I supplied a short brief prior to this meeting just to comment on what I was going to discuss. Obviously, there's a more substantive presentation which I'm going to go through. It's not too long, I promise, because I know you've got quite a packed agenda today. The main elements I wanted to talk through today really are these topics. So I wanted to reiterate again the functions of the Integrated Transport Unit, because I know it's probably been some time since we've updated you. I want to discuss a little bit why the ITU was formed again, just to reiterate. Also discuss a little bit about our COVID transport response, because obviously the ITU was set up in a very different time almost, even though it was only less than a year ago. But we think that our response to COVID, especially via transport, has showed some of the benefits of having a more integrated approach. I then want to talk a little bit about vehicle utilisation and route optimisation, particularly on our home to school trips and adult care services that we deliver internally and via contracts. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the bus network recovery and what we've seen with some of the trends via COVID, and also the Interlink partnership, which we entered into, the enhanced partnership earlier this year, and some of the benefits and toolkit leverage that gives us, we think, in our recovery as a bus network recovers. So firstly, hopefully you can see this, just the functions of the Integrated Transport Unit. So I just wanted to reiterate again that we've brought together all of the transport delivery really within Hertfordshire County Council, which comes to about £27.3 million a year in terms of budget. And that's to plan all of our school user journeys, both for our special education needs students and mainstream students every day. Also our adult care services to go to voluntary and commissioned and in-day services centres, but also providing our dial-a-ride and other community transport. As part of that, we also provide for the external public-facing bus network. So as I mentioned, we formed the Enhanced Interlink Partnership to improve reliability and customer experience. And we plan and commission transport for the bus network for about 10% of our routes overall via our contracted routes. And obviously we work with our commercial providers such as Arriva, Uno and others to deliver that safe, sustainable bus service in Hertfordshire. And the final big part, I guess, of the integrated transport unit is we deliver the affordable and efficient transport services to support HUC financial objectives. So we're almost acting as a bit of a centre of excellence, particularly around concessionary travel and other saver car ticketing schemes. But also a part we're really excited about is exploring the data metrics we have and sort of leveraging some of that data and expertise on passenger transport to help the Hertfordshire bus network as we move forward. Just to move on a bit to why the integrated transport unit was formed again. So really it was formed to ensure all of Hertfordshire's transport is efficiently delivered, utilising a more holistic approach rather than discrete elements across the council. A couple of things I just want to focus on here really. So we're really looking at our sustainability agenda, especially around working towards a greener fleet. We have about 100 internal vehicles and we have a representative on the working group looking at how that can become more sustainable in the future. Another key part for us is taking our home to school network and adult care services transport. On a busy day, we have about 1,000 vehicles on the road across Hertfordshire. And we want to look at how we can make that a bit more efficient with optimising routes to provide a more low mileage network so we don't have as many vehicles on the road, hopefully going forward. Another key part for us is around the innovation and technology. So we're very much plugged into wider transformation projects and any innovation on the transport market to see how we can improve things for Hertfordshire users and residents and almost act as that catalyst for change within Hertfordshire County Council to ensure there's an integrated approach to our data and systems around transport. Just moving on a little bit in terms of our COVID response. So we think in a way it showed demonstrated the integrated approach that we can deliver. So I came to panel, I know, in September and gave a much more detailed presentation around our approach to the return of schools in September. So just to reiterate for that, really, we planned, procured and delivered 76 extra duplicate buses onto the bus network for mainstream pupils, and primarily all of those are still running today, and we're just waiting on further funding for after Christmas. We also delivered a custom communications campaign, including social media, website and traditional media, to convey the safety and transport messages, especially around social distancing. And the benefit we had there is we could align our message across all transport because it was in one place. We also were able to do some collaborative working with our commercial bus partners to ensure our network was ready and running at capacity. And the other thing we're able to do is utilise all of our internal drivers and vehicles a bit better, which I'll come on to now, to assist on some of those school transport journeys. So, for example, I understand we had our first ever internally run education route from September, which had never been done before on a sustained basis. It's worked really well, and that's given us the confidence to start another one in January. So it's utilising vehicles and drivers who particularly aren't needed for other things at the moment to benefit other users and journeys that we provide for within the council remit. Just to move on to that, these two quite basic pie charts are just trying to show how we've utilised our internal drivers a little better in the past few months. So on the left is our driver allocation pre-COVID, really, where about 20% of our drivers were dedicated towards dial-a-ride services, and then about 80% were dedicated to commissioned and voluntary day services for adult care users. This on the right is the chart showing in October leading into November. So as you can see, dial-a-ride has remained relatively stagnant, although social distancing has meant we've had less capacity on vehicles. But we've still needed around 18 to 20% of drivers for that service. But what we've been able to do is offer more of our drivers to in-house day services, which already had their own separate drivers. And we've also been able to utilise some drivers and vehicles for our home to school transport, like I mentioned. The other thing we've been able to do, the green part of this, is utilise some of our drivers to replace what we would have used as existing external contracts. So we've saved some money there as well. But this is really just trying to illustrate that we've been able to utilise our drivers in different ways. Obviously, the chart on the left will go back to normal at some point, but we're doing some work now in the interim to look at how this can work going forward to better utilise our drivers as a more flexible fleet for the council. Just to move on to this next slide around vehicle utilisation and route optimisation. So the top table really is just to show sort of the enormity of the operation from a transport cost and logistics sense. So we reckon we've got about £6 million worth of internal vehicle assets, which have been bought over time, currently predominantly supporting adult care service functions and users. We have about 150 plus drivers and support workers in post to fulfil these functions. Our contracted costs, so this is where we're procuring taxis and small vehicles from the market for our adult care users and children's services, is about £25.3 million annually. That's split roughly to about 22.6 million for children's services and about 2.4 million for adult care users. Might be a spot that doesn't quite add up to 25.3 because there's a little bit in there for respite care as well in the budget. In terms of users, we've got 3,280 children transported on a daily basis on these taxis and small vehicles, and about 1,300 adult users transported on internal vehicles and external taxis on a weekly basis. So our aim really with this is to ensure that our vehicle assets are maximised as fully as possible. So we still focus on every user, but hopefully we can reduce our external contracting costs by better utilising our internal vehicle fleet. So to ensure that, we're undertaking a review, utilising strong data and modelling elements to simulate what a normal day looks like for users and what we need to do to achieve that going forward. Now, I know you may say reviews have happened in the past. With this one, we want to quickly ascertain a conclusive answer. Do we have spare capacity on our existing internal fleet? Can it be used day in, day out for other purposes? This in turn reduces our external costs, but also improves the journeys for users every day, hopefully. So to do that, we've developed a bit of a roadmap going forward. So phase one really is our manual work, which we've done. Because we've brought all the teams together, we've been able to look at where those initial synergies are in terms of providing transport for our home to school and adult care service users. So for example, we've moved 9 vehicle and routes internal until March 2021, an initial saving of about £30,000 by doing that internally because we've got the spare capacity. We've identified another 100 routes that could benefit from being run internally if we had the capacity spare, but that's what we need to find from this work. And that manual review has also enabled us to get the right behaviours moving forward to sort of look at our transport holistically rather than on an individual basis. So to move this forward now, we need to get some really good clean data on our requirements. What does a normal day look like for user movements across the county, and how can that fluctuate and how volatile is it? We then need to simulate that using some market engagement to get that modelling together, to then work with our subject matter experts internally to ensure the simulation is feasible, and we're pretty confident it could be rolled out. In terms of phase 2 then, we want to create the conditions to deliver that normal day every day and make sure it's sustainable. And that obviously has technology, user information and logistics implications we need to work through. And then phase 3 really is, if that's all successful, delivering that new model and ensuring the structure complements our new model of delivery for how we utilise our internal vehicles. So that's quite ambitious in its sort of outlook, but we're pretty confident we can look through that and find some innovation and efficiencies in what we do, but still focused on the user, as I mentioned. So for the final part of my presentation, I just wanted to talk through a bit about the public-facing bus network and its recovery from COVID. So these are some of the headlines we've put together. Overall, the commercial bus network, which forms about 90% of the network, is running at about 80% of service levels at the moment. And our contracted services, which forms about 10% of the network, is at about 85%. We estimate patronage across the whole bus network is between about 40 to 50% at the moment. Demand has changed during the pandemic. Our work is now being undertaken to analyse whether that change in demand will sustain, and at what point we may reach pre-pandemic levels of patronage, or whether the demand changes forever based on different needs of the users. I should mention a small percentage of contracted services, and this is quite a small percentage, have been returned to the county council due to not being financially viable at the moment, but we've put in place emergency contracts to tender them back out in the long term. So just to move on to show some of the trends. So this is only a snapshot of the network, but this is an example of some of our contracted routes that have, pre-COVID, did have over 3,000 passengers in a 4-weekly period. So we've started this analysis from 5th of January 2020, and it's in 4-week blocks. So on the left, you can see the total number of passengers for that route in a 4-weekly period. And on the right, you can see the route numbers, and on the bottom, you can see the date range. So this pretty much validates our assumptions and what we've heard from commercial providers, that the recovery is around 40 to 50% of normal patronage at the moment. As you can see, that took quite a big downward slope in March when the initial lockdown went into place. And then there was quite a steady recovery until October. What you'll notice is we haven't quite got the up-to-date stats yet. They're coming imminently for the restrictions we've just come out to see if that's gone down again. You may notice there are a couple of outliers there. So the 658, which is actually a contracted number, sorry for that anomaly, is actually the public-facing 357, the Route 80 and the Route 341641. All have done a little bit better, although they did start with a much higher total of passengers and patronage. We're still looking into what the exact reasons are for those recoveries in those three routes in particular. They are relatively long routes, so we expect they'll pick up more passengers along the way. And they did also have quite a high percentage of school students and university students amongst them. So we're expecting that also tallies with some of the range and the increases we saw sort of from September onwards. But that's really just to give a flavour of where we're at. You may ask, how is it useful? Well, we need to do more analysis on it, but it's useful to show the various trends that we have as we're recovering now with the bus network. And it allows us to keep a watchful eye on those routes at the lower end as we get more substantial data to make sure they are recovering as well as we hope. So just to move on to the final part, really, we think we've got a really good toolkit with the enhanced partnership we entered into earlier this year to aid the recovery of the bus network. And we're splitting this into a number of areas to talk through briefly. Prioritising bus services on the road. Obviously, I'll come on to in a moment some of our bus priority infrastructure work, which this year is focusing on Stevenage, St Albans and Watford initially. And we're also looking at signal upgrades that could assist the bus mode of travel and help them get through pinch points a bit quicker to help with reliability. We're also trying to improve the image of bus travel for users. That particularly comes into, social distancing and making sure buses are seen as a safe way of travel, which we've been doing, but also the look and feel of the bus network for users when they search a journey or book a journey or pay for a journey. So we launched a new website in the summer, which has a great new enhanced journey planning option on it to search for journeys. We've also looked at more opportunity for mobile ticketing, so less cashless journeys, and we're also doing a bus shelter review into the look and the feel of the infrastructure on the street. We also want to look at smarter use of data and information. So we're doing an assessment, as I mentioned, of the current bus data to inform any gaps on the network and how it recovers. We're integrating more patronage information for better insights about where the network's performing well and not so well. And that will help us instigate further customer feedback and the analysis of journeys to inform that going forward. We also want to identify bus models and innovations that will work. So we're looking at things like demand responsive transport in different areas to see if that's a part of the toolkit we could also utilise to help with the bus recovery. The other main thing I just want to mention is around upgrading bus infrastructure. So we've continued that quite ambitious plan to deliver a number of real-time information screens at bus stops and shelters. That's continued with 15 installed this year. We're also installing bus shelters on a continuous installation programme to make sure the community has a feel for them and uses for them. But just to mention really 3 successes in the last few weeks really around, we're installing a green living shelter in St Albans in a couple of weeks hopefully, which hopefully meets more of our sustainability agenda, and that could hopefully be rolled out across the network. We've also installed a solar powered real-time information bus shelter in Hermitage Road in Hitchin, as it had some power supply issues there. So we're trying to use solar power to sort of benefit that information store for customers. And also in the next few weeks, we're hopefully installing our first solar powered lighting bus shelter in Hammond Street bus turn near Cheshire. As again, it has a power supply issue there. We want to make sure that lighting's right, especially with the darker nights coming in for users. So that's a number of elements we're looking at as part of the Interlink Enhanced Partnership. I just want to mention really briefly a bit more detail on the bus priority improvements, because we have been working on those in the background, even during COVID. So just to discuss briefly the process of how we've got to this point. So at the start of this work, at the start of the year really, or last year, we engaged with bus operators and other stakeholders to get their open views and data on where pinch points were across the bus network. We compared those locations with any published projects and other source documents to identify any project synergies with stuff that was already being planned for in the future. And then we carried out a number of feasibility studies into Stevenage, St Albans and Watford within the first tranche of this. And then we took a bit of a prioritisation exercise on deliverability factors to place those into tranches of work that we could deliver. So I'm not going to go into this all detail now. It's probably one for a future panel to give an update about the whole programme, as it's quite a substantial piece of work. But just to give a flavour, an example of an expected programme, which you'll see on the screen now. So this is just breaking it down into the tranches. So you'll see T1 against all of the 3 areas. And these are really quick wins. So these are looking at shelter improvements, curbside improvements for accessibility, some bus cage and marking improvements to help, again, with the flow and reliability. As you can see, as we enter into year 2 and year 3, that's where maybe some of the more complex programmes and projects come together, which we're still analysing and working on for those deliverables. In terms of quick wins, we have started in Watford, and we're imminently due to start in Stevenage and St Albans before the end of this year to get those delivered. So members in those areas should have either been contacted or will be contacted shortly on those. And then obviously as we move into year 2 and 3 with the more detailed tranches. But there's a lot more detail behind this. I just wanted to give you a flavour of some of the work that is being looked at. And the final slide really just to show an example of that in Watford. So we went on site at a number of locations in Watford in October, which shows here, serving a number of routes. And as I mentioned, these are a lot of quick win projects where we're looking at curb upgrades, cage markings being refreshed and some bus shelter improvements. So they're more marginal gains for the bus network and reliability rather than sort of big bang improvements, which hopefully should come in the following years. These were things that were more quickly and easily deliverable for the network. And that's the end of my presentation, so I'll just stop sharing and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Now, I've got some echo here. I was going to say thank you very much, Andrew. Just to say, first of all, we'll get that presentation shared and send it out by email to all members. So if there's any particular issues that in there that once you've seen the presentation again, you want to follow up with Andrew offline, I'm sure I'll be more than happy to actually to do that. But in the meantime, I'll invite members for their views and comments, and I've got Sharon Taylor first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Andrew, for a great presentation and for summarising what's an awful lot of work in such a succinct way. I really appreciate that. The main, first of all, can I say I love the green initiatives, especially the idea of green bus stops, and that's something I'd certainly want us to look at here as we go forward. We've got a brand new bus station being developed in Stevenage, for those of you who don't know. We're looking at every possible way we can make that more environmentally friendly. So, you know, whether it's solar powered, whether it's using digital technology or green bus stops, we'll be happy to embrace any of that here. I also welcome the pinch point study. I don't know if that's what you called it, but hope that refers you to what I'm talking about. Yeah. We have a number of bus routes in Stevenage that go round residential streets, which were built back in the 50s and are very narrow. And I got the information this morning about a couple of routes where I've long had concerns that they're just not safe because the buses are trying to squeeze through a residential road with parked cars on either side. And I think the rerouting of some of those is essential. My question on those, Andrew, is are we going to take some customer feedback around those rerouting, those rerouted bus services so that we can find out what the new routes are meaning to people? I think that would be helpful if we can do that. My main point was around the reliability of services. That remains a really big issue, particularly in areas where there may only be a half-hourly bus service. When they cut a bus out, that means some of the people that use the bus service, some of whom are quite vulnerable, have a very long wait indeed, which is bad enough in the summer, but it's absolutely awful in the winter when they've got to wait, and they often don't know whether they're going to get the next bus along or not. So I think this does remain an issue for many parts of my borough, and I'm sure it's the same across the county. It's not all routes. There seem to be a number of routes which are particularly susceptible to last-minute cancellations and unreliable services. And my borough council ward, Simon's Green, has a particular issue with this. We do really suffer from it. And the other issue, which really exercises residents, is when the bus services stop fairly early in the evening. If you're a commuter, and I know not many people are commuting at the moment, but if you are, and your bus service finishes at 7, you probably won't be home from your London commute in time to get the last bus back. So that's the other issue that's been raised with me. And I appreciate, there's not funding for everything, but I do think we have to continue to look at solutions for these. Even if the service was greatly reduced after 7 o'clock, it would at least give people a safe route home if there was even an hourly bus. So they're just my comments. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Sharon. Andrew?
Yeah, so no, a number of really good points, actually. I think in terms of the green initiatives, yeah, we're looking at how those sort of work when we first put them out and see if we can roll those out across the network further. So happy to keep obviously members informed on that and how it goes, but we're hoping it's successful in the locations we've identified. Yeah, I think in terms of the pinch point work, it's very much looking at those locations where we can get those marginal gains of a few minutes here, a few minutes there to sort of accumulate to the overall good. In turn, that should hopefully improve the reliability of routes so they don't have to be cut as much, potentially, without knowing the details, obviously, of all the ones that you've mentioned. But I think your wider point around, obviously, customers being able to rely on a servicing and knowing when the service will come is really important. And I think the enhanced partnership gives us a number of powers that we've probably not explored fully at the moment, but we are going forward around some of the traffic commissioner powers and some of the data we can get to help with that, sort of really focus on the customer experience. So no, it's all good points that we're definitely going to factor into our future work.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Simon, you want to come in?
Yeah, it's just a follow-up and not completely relevant to Sharon's comment about late night services, but we do need to and will be looking over the next week or two at increased services or possibly increased services for the Christmas period. We've received a letter from the DfT to ask us to do that, and also we need to understand the shopping pattern going forward over the next few weeks in Hertfordshire, because obviously there's been some talk about 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shopping. So again, we'll need to just think about how we can respond to that as well. It doesn't answer Sharon's point, but we are looking in the shorter term at, well, I'm not going to say increasing capacity, but how we can manage perhaps later night activity, whether it be shopping or the Christmas rush, if there is a Christmas rush.
Okay, thanks, Simon. I think the next one is Richard Smith, and then it will be Asif Khan and John Hale.
Thank you very much. I wanted to home in on the very same subject that's been mentioned now a couple of times, and that is I wonder if it's worth doing some serious market research to see what the demand could be from the many smaller settlements in the county. And the question that was raised correctly by Sharon Taylor is exactly what I've seen in a number of settlements in my area. I think we need to consider having smaller buses, much smaller. The big buses cannot get round some of the very areas where there are people without cars. So I think some market research would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take Asif and John, and then I'll get Andrew to come back. Asif?
Thank you. So my point is, I've got a number of points. I think if we want people to take more buses, I think it's imperative to reduce the cost of bus fares. So what are the measures that prevent people from taking buses? One is reliability, as some of my other councillor colleagues have mentioned, and the frequency, etc. Can they rely on getting from A to B, whether it's work or shopping or visiting families on buses? That's one question. Second is actually the cost of bus fares in Hertfordshire. Unfortunately, people still think, and probably it's true, that driving a car is probably more cost effective for doing so. So I think that's something to really look into. If, for example, in London, which is subsidised, and buses are much more heavily used by young people, by people who, when we're going to have new car-free settlements and buildings going up all over Watford in particular, the transport needs to match that particular demand and make sure it is enticed. The other thing I'd like to just think about is make sure consulting local members. There are certain things happening in my division, and you mentioned in Watford, wasn't aware of that at all, and some local insight would have advised a better option. For example, removal of a bus inlay in St Albans Road, causing more traffic problems and actually not solving the issue what it's trying to do. So a consultation before it was being implemented would have helped and solved, and that wasn't done, unfortunately. So I would like more local consultation when some of these initiatives are put into place.
Well, I can make a comment on that, but I'll leave it till afterwards. John Hale.
Yeah, this follows on to a certain extent from what Sharon, Richard and Asif have been saying, but I am slightly confused, as my understanding was there were relatively few Herts County Council supported bus routes, and largely most of our bus routes these days are privately operated commercial operations. Given that, what levers does the County Council have to get those commercial operators to run more buses? I'm just a little bit confused. I understood that the bus network in Hertfordshire was privatised, and therefore, you know, why are we having this discussion? I fully agree with Richard and Sharon that the bus network is insufficient, and we need more buses in the rural network. But under the current legislation, I see no way that that could be introduced. On Asif's thing, I think most people underestimate the cost of their car and overestimate the cost of the bus. But as I expect more and more councils will be introducing charges for parking, that may become clearer to them that actually when they drive into the town centre and then spend £5 on parking, they might have saved the money on petrol and parking by taking the bus. But yeah, I'm just confused as to why we're talking about improving bus services when it's in a private operation.
Okay, thanks, John. We may return to some of these comments a bit later on. Steve Jarvis.
Thank you. I was not actually going to talk about public bus services. Large part of my division doesn't have any at all, so there's absolute certainty when the next bus is coming. It's never. What I wanted to talk about was the internal transport services, where clearly there's been quite a lot of work done in terms of how we can optimise the use of that. But I wonder how that fits in with what we're talking about later in terms of the sustainability strategy, because it seems to me that there's potentially some fairly significant, not only financial but also environmental gains from changing the way in which we deliver some of these services. Some of it's about changing the vehicles we use, some of it is about optimising how we use them. So how's that being taken into account?
Oh, thanks, Steve. Right, Andrew, do you want to pick up on those points?
Yeah. So I think I've tracked who said what, but forgive me. Hopefully I'll get these right. So Richard, I think you talked a bit about obviously, big buses in terms of getting around the smaller villages and locations. I think as part of the enhanced partnership, we are looking to do a lot more market research with customers sort of in the new year. We've held off that a little bit because we are in a bit of a tricky situation at the moment with obviously some of the COVID restrictions and bus use. We want to wait a little bit until it returns as near normal as possible before we undertake that work. But a big part of that will be looking at where our buses are provided for at the moment and where there's any gaps or things that we can do, utilising different methods and different things we can do with buses. So that's definitely on the agenda. I think Asif was next. I think in terms of reliability, I completely agree. I think customers need to be able to rely that the timetable is what it says. And I think part of that with the bus priority work we're doing is enabling those pinch point locations to be sorted out, which does mean some of the work in Watford, for example, is really important for the bus network. And if we can do that, we can make the buses more reliable and work with our commercial providers as well as our contracted routes to hopefully deliver that. I think in terms of cost, you are right. I think a lot of what we're trying to do with the Interlink partnership is demystify some of the elements around paying for a bus and using a bus. You know, I lived in London for most of the past 10 years, and I know that, you know, being able to just touch on a bus and utilise some of that technology is really important to demystify some of those methods around paying and using a bus. So that's definitely important around the technology. And yeah, I definitely take your point in terms of Watford. I think the one you're referring to in St Albans Road, we did investigate when you mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, I think, and sent some enforcement officers there who did analyse for quite a while and couldn't quite see the delays that were given across, but we're happy to investigate that further if you've had further information. But I take your general point about sort of engaging and consulting as we go with some of the more contentious things that might come up that will still improve things for the buses. But yeah, obviously need to keep you in the loop going forward. And I think John was next. I think John, just in terms of the bus networks, you are right. 90% of the network is commercial, private operators, but 10% is contracted. I think what the Interlink Enhanced Partnership gives us, and we're happy to give a more thorough presentation on that as we go forward, is it gives us a much bigger toolkit to help leverage, especially the infrastructure and the ticketing, and sort of enabling people to get to the bus. Obviously, we're still reliant on our commercial providers to provide that reliable service, but we're trying to work in partnership as much as possible to help them with the model that we have. So it's a really good point. And I think, Steve, in terms of the internal fleet, we do have, as I mentioned, one of the team on a cross-departmental working group looking at how that internal fleet can become greener as we go, and sort of the technology we have with those vehicles. We did procure our first electric vehicle, I believe, internally a couple of months ago, which is now being used. And it's the other point that you mentioned around route optimization. If we can reduce our overall vehicles on the road each day, which I think is quite substantial, like I mentioned, about 1,000 on a busy day, that should hopefully lead to improvements going forward as well. I think I covered all the points there, but let me know if not.
Andrew, thank you very much. Now, I see no other hands at the moment. So, as I said, we'll circulate the presentation. If members want to follow up with any issues in the presentation, I'm sure Andrew would be more than happy to take your queries. But in the meantime, if you can indicate in the chat function you're happy to note the presentation and note the report. Thank you. Right, thank you very much indeed, colleagues. There's one or two more coming in. Item 5 is Harlow Gilston Garden Town grant funding from Homes England. This is quite a complex report actually, but has gone to the economy panel as well. Gavin, are you with us?
I am. Yes. Yep. I'm here.
Okay. Perhaps you can just we'll take this report as read, but just take us through the headlines, and then we'll move to the recommendations. Because although we have some locus in this, we don't have the prime financial interest.
Okay, I'll just very briefly give you the background of it then. The council have made a bid to Homes England, their housing infrastructure fund, in connection with the proposed development of the Harlow Gilston Garden Town. The infrastructure that looking to put in place would support the Gilston area, which would bring about circa 10,000 homes. So Homes England have awarded £171 million to deliver the infrastructure, and HEC would be subject to that obligation, but of course it wouldn't actually be carrying out the work. It's acting very much as a middleman and passing the money on to Essex County Council and Places for People, who would actually deliver the infrastructure, let the contracts, etc. And the way that would be structured legally is that HCC would enter into a grant funding agreement with Homes England, and then at the same time would immediately try to back off all its liabilities and obligations via a back-to-back arrangement with PFP and Essex. So the reason this is being brought to needs to go to Cabinet really is due to the size. The 171 million is quite a significant sum, and the risk associated with it. So the essential point, I think, being that whilst in reality Hertfordshire is acting very much as the middleman, from a technical point of view, it would remain on the hook. It would remain liable. And the key point being that Hertfordshire's liability is not dependent upon recovery from either PFP or Essex. And so the couple of potential risks there. Well, there's you can imagine that in a transaction project this size, there's a multitude of risks, but the key ones particularly being when you're dealing with a private limited company, there's always the risk of insolvency, in which case HCC could very much remain on the hook for delivering that infrastructure work, or there's always the risk of delay in what is a time-limited pot of money. So it's the reason, again, this is being brought to Cabinet is so that Cabinet can either authorise or not. But if it does authorise, it authorises us to enter into that transaction very much in recognition of the risks, in the knowledge of the risks associated with it, in a kind of eyes wide open kind of situation. And I should probably just say before I open up for any questions is there are various elements of mitigation. You've obviously got your back-to-back, which if that goes well, there'd be no risk whatsoever, notionally. Within the agreements, there's a multitude of conditions precedent, which means that the project shouldn't go ahead and money shouldn't be spent until all the ducks are in a row and you've got a viable and deliverable scheme. The money would be paid in arrears. There's significant audit and monitoring provisions within the agreements. And then also, I think a key factor will be the interrelation between this grant and the highways and planning process. So there will be kind of a second and third layer of enforcement there, or comfort and protection, either through your 278s and the connected bond, if that comes forward, and also through your kind of Section 106 obligations and planning conditions. So I think that hopefully summarises it.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I think that summarises it, but I say it's quite a complex it is. Web here. But members, I'll take queries and questions, and let's have a look. Stephen, you were the first.
Thank you. This is a complicated matter, and quite frankly, I don't think I've got enough information to make a decision on it. It is a very large sum of money, and we all know that large projects always seem to run over time and over budget. You've only got to mention, say, Crossrail, and you're going to get an idea of what that would mean. We are virtually acting as guarantor here. As you say, there'll be back-to-back agreements, and we would hope if anything went wrong that we would recover it from the other parties. But as you also said, our liability wouldn't depend on recovery. I just don't think I've got enough information to sort of nod it through and say, yes, 171 million is okay. I'll be happy to note the report, but wouldn't want to commit it. Thank you.
Yes. So if I could just respond on that, I think you're right. It is complicated, and there are various nuances, and I think if we were to try to set those out on in a report, it'd end up being as long as the contractual documents that we're working on at the moment. But I think the key point is that in terms of the recommendation, it is to give that the ability to finalise a negotiation and be satisfied in the terms of the structure of the deal to the Director of Resources in consultation with others, and there's also a little proviso on the end of that recommendation that says that before exercising that delegation, we'll need to be satisfied that that we've taken all reasonable steps to mitigate the risk. So I think there is some protection there in terms of the ensuring that those complexities aren't missed and that they are detangled as much as possible, and that we're taking steps to protect ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right, Steve Jarvis.
Well, I think the first question has to be why, given there's 10,000 houses being built, it's worked out about £17,000 a house, why the developers aren't paying for the cost of providing the sustainable transport access to their development. However, I suspect that I know the answer to that. I suspect it's because they've been able to wriggle out of doing that. But it's
sorry, I could probably just give you a bit more information on that. The reason Homes England are interested in this is not the obligations on PFP are the same obligations that would have arisen over the course of time via the planning obligations. So they're not doing anything extra, they're not doing anything different, other than what they will be doing is allowing to, it will hopefully accelerate, that's the idea of the fundings, to accelerate the provision of funding, and also to give HCC some ability to get involved in the strategic moulding of the project as a whole. So that's I suppose that's the kind of underlying rationale of making the bid in the first place.
I mean, I'm always the first to jump in terms of developer contributions, as members know. But in this particular instance, I mean, I believe PFP are on the hook for something around £60,000 a dwelling, what I read, because of the provision of schools, in a number of schools and all the local infrastructure, etc. And at that level, it's sort of on the, it brings it towards the margin of viability under current market conditions, as I understand it. So I don't think in this particular instance they're getting away with murder. I actually think the developers that are getting away with murder are the ones on the smaller sites. I think the big strategic sites, I think we are getting more of a reasonable contribution. I'll just make that point anyway. Thank you, Gavin. Is there anyone else? Steve, you want to come back?
Well, yes. I mean, that clearly reflects what they've undertaken to pay for the land, doesn't it, Derek?
No, that discounts that as well.
But also, as I understand it, it's not clear to me what control we have over PFP delivering. But I guess I'd be told that that's all covered by the detailed agreements.
Yeah, so the agreements will have a specification, all that kind of stuff that you would expect, and HCC will be obliged to ensure the delivery of that those infrastructure works in accordance with the specification, which then will be passed on to PFP and/or Essex. So yeah, so there will be detailed design work of which they need to comply with.
And the only problem arises if either Essex, which is probably unlikely, or PFP, which is perhaps more likely, don't meet their obligations.
Yeah, and that's really one of the key reasons of bringing it to looking to take it to cabinet, is that you've always got the risk when you're dealing with third parties that they're not going to do what they say they're going to do. They're not going to do it on time. They're not going to do it to the satisfaction of Homes England. So yeah, it is a risk. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why if cabinet agrees to enter into this, it needs to do that with its eyes open. Yeah.
I mean, one of the problems is, of course, that Homes England won't take the risk. I mean, and that is an ongoing issue, I think, really. Yep. Basically, they've got given out all these grants, but they won't accept any risk associated with it, which I think is another issue altogether. I mean, what this report is doing is pointing out to members there is an element of risk, but it's asking members to authorise the Director of Environment and the Director of Resources to actually enter into detailed negotiations and tie this up as much as they can. Quite frankly, we haven't got too much of an option really, because we don't particularly want to lose 170 million. So it's a bit of Hodgson's choice to some extent, I think. Gavin, you may disagree, but I think it's a bit of a Hodgson's choice, and I think we're just trying to tie this up as much as we can. And it's right that it should be drawn to the attention of members, but what it's asking is members to give the authority for the directors to play as hardball as they can with this, to try and minimise any downside risks for the county council. Is that a true statement, Gavin?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, fine. All right. Any other? I've got Rupert.
Sorry to interject.
No, go on.
I just thought it might be worth stating that this fund seeks to forward fund key infrastructure to support the delivery of sustainable transport infrastructure early in the development's life, which is very much in line with our ambitions around LTP4. It is expected that money will be paid back through the 106 and recycling process to then enable further sustainable transport measures to be reinvested in around the wider Garden Town to meet the ambitions around the 60% mode split and 40% mode split for existing communities within Harlow, Gilston, Garden Town.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Rupert, for that. And these are some very demanding targets as well that we're trying to stick with Harlow, East Herts and Essex. Okay, John Hale.
Sorry if I've missed something or you know, I'm coming up to this bit late in the day, but why aren't Essex getting the funding?
The reason Hertfordshire put the application in firstly, I understand, is that it had to be a top tier authority that put the application in. So that's kind of ruled out some of the districts, and the majority of the housing's in Hertfordshire.
That's right.
So that's why Hertfordshire had to be the kind of lead authority on it, even though some of the infrastructure is in Essex.
And Homes England find this attractive on the basis of opening up and enabling early delivery of more housing, basically. Okay. John, you want to come back?
I suppose that then begs the question as to why is this called Harlow?
Well, we could be here for another 2 hours on that, John. I've got my own views and all that, but the current official title is Harlow Gilston Garden Town. But we've all got our own views as to whether that has got long-term viability, but that's another issue at the moment. Thanks, John. Okay, I see no other hands. Could I ask members, please, on the basis of Gavin's contribution, to actually please agree the recommendations on the order paper, that Cabinet authorises Hertfordshire County Council enter into the grant funding agreement with Homes England and any subsequent or connected documentation as may be necessary. And B, on the order paper, to delegate authority to negotiate, agree and complete all necessary documents that the Director of Resources, in consultation with the Director of Environment and Infrastructure and the Executive Member for Growth, Infrastructure, Planning and the Economy and the Executive Member for Resources and Performance, provided that the Director of Resources is satisfied that the Council has taken all reasonable measures to mitigate the risks to the Council resulting from the project. And
Sorry, just to interrupt there, that actually, Councillor Sangster's asked that I amend that.
I didn't make it through to my final agenda, but don't worry, tell me what the amendment's like. Yeah,
it's just the addition of in consultation with the Director of, Executive Member for Resources also. So it's just additional consultee in recommendation B.
I've got that in there, and the executive member. I've got that in there, and the Executive Member for Resources.
Oh, you have? Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, it did make it. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm looking at mine.
It's in there, but the last phrase, it's not in there, but I didn't think it was necessary. The last phrase says, providing that the Director of Resources is satisfied the Council has taken all reasonable measures. But the authority to negotiate and agree is in consultation with the Executive Member of Resources and indeed myself and the two directors.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Fine. And C, to delegate the day-to-day running of the project to the Director of Resources in consultation with the Director of Environment and Infrastructure, so as to allow the Council to exercise all powers under the documents connected with the project. Members, I'd be grateful if you could indicate your agreement to that recommendation in the chat function. Thank you very much indeed. Item 6, rail strategy. So this is Val Mail. Val?
Yes, good afternoon, Derek. Yes, so the rail strategy, as members may remember, came to panel last October, I think, at the end of last year anyway, in its draft form. It has subsequently been out for a 12-week period of public consultation, and following that, amendments have been made to the strategy, and we now feel that we have our final version, and so we would welcome members' agreement to adopt this as a supporting document of LTP4. The changes that we've made are sort of outlined in the paper.
Okay, thank you very much, Val. this is quite an interesting paper actually, and actually is a very good umbrella document of everything rail in Hertfordshire, and it's got a complete list of all of the responses, which I think is very helpful. But at the moment, what we asked here to actually endorse the adoption of the rail strategy as a supporting document to the LTP. But I'm very happy to take contributions. First of all, it's Adam.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question on agenda pack page 106, which talks about cycle storage at Stevenage station. I just wondered if any thought's been given to a creation of more storage, not necessarily in the station itself, but close by, within sort of very easy walking distance, because where Stevenage station is located, it's very close to the town centre, car parking, public and private, and I was just wondering if any thought had been given to that.
Well, I'll ask Val to come back first, but then Sharon might help us out.
Well, the quick answer is no. We're working with GTR, who I know are looking to see if they can identify a more efficient use of space at the station to provide more storage. But obviously, we'd be open to work with any partners who could identify other locations that might serve the station.
All right, Val, thanks. Sharon?
We've got a cunning plan, Chair.
Yes.
So it's part of the new town development. We are looking at an extensive cycle parking facility at the station, so including things like changing facilities, secure lockers, those kind of things. So I can talk to you more outside the meeting, Adam, if you want to hear a bit. You may have heard about it in an overview and scrutiny at Stevenage, but if you want some more information, I'm happy to give you that outside the meeting. But it's a very extensive project, and we are very keen that we have a good cycle parking facility in very close proximity to the station, because we want people to cycle to the station using our 45 kilometres of cycleway, not drive there in their cars. So that's in the plans. I wanted to make a couple of points on the paper myself, Chair, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Firstly, on page 87, there is reference to there not being intercity services from Stevenage. We do have very recently had news of a direct service to Edinburgh from Stevenage, so we're very pleased about that. It's a new operator. It's taken about 3 years to go through the train operating process, but we were notified that they've been given the go-ahead now, so that's really good news. So that we'll pass on details to county officers, but that's really great to hear that we will now have a direct service to Edinburgh from Stevenage. On page 88 of the agenda pack, I'm just finding my own pages here. In relation to the, I welcome the comments about a significant rebuild of Stevenage Station being made. This has been a long-held ambition of the Borough Council. We have had one improvement of the 5th platform being built and a new access to that platform going in. But I think the strategy is quite right to say what we really need now is a very significant rebuild of Stevenage Station to reflect the high-tech industries we have in the town, and to take the higher level of traffic that we're not experiencing at the moment, but hopefully in 6 months' time, when we all start to go back to something a bit more like normal, we will be. And my last comment was around the Luton link, and I really welcome on page 89 reference to a link between Stevenage and Luton that will provide better access for the airport and for work, the workforces that travel between Stevenage and Luton for the airport. But it also, of course, provides a direct link with the West Coast line, which I think is incredibly helpful for Hertfordshire. So I really welcome that. And as you say, Chair, this is a very comprehensive report which provides a great overview of the rail services in Hertfordshire and some very ambitious and welcome developments for the future.
Right, just to come back on that, I mean, Stevenage to Luton would link to the Midland main line, not necessarily the West Coast main line.
Apologies, Chair, that's what I meant. My apologies.
but I have sympathy with your other comments. I think the issue on their new open access operator was mentioned on 87 under planned service changes. And they mentioned the first group plan October 2021, which has now been put off to 2022. So I think it is actually in there. And I totally agree with you, Stevenage Station. And I've said in fora before, particularly when I've been in Stevenage, which hasn't been that recent, that I do think the business should be banging the drum a lot more on this issue to get ministers, DFT, and indeed various other people who need to be influenced on the case. I'll just make that point, Sharon. I don't know whether you can...
They certainly bang the drum with me, Chair. I think they need to bang the drum a bit more with the people who have the influence to do something about this.
This is what
Sadly, I don't run Network Rail. If I did, I'd do it tomorrow.
No, but that's what I'm to be a bit more public with those who take the decisions, those who have influence on the decisions. I say no more. Okay. Graham McAndrew, Stephen Bolton, then Steve Jarvis. Graham.
Yeah, page 110 of the report, Bishop Stortford. It's about secure cycle storage and the use. I've been trying for a number of years now to motivate them to resolve this issue, but they find reasons not to put something in place. And I know it's an operational issue, but you know.
Well, perhaps we can take that up offline. Val, you're aware of this. Are we pressurising them at all on this?
Yeah, well, we can do so again. I was under the impression from Greater Anglia that it had been resolved, but it sounds like it probably hasn't been. So
perhaps you could talk about that. Okay, Stephen Bolton.
Thank you. Couple of points. Very good report, very comprehensive. I'm particularly interested in the carbon neutral running of the railways by 2050, hopefully before then. The important thing here, of course, is that we will need to know where the electricity comes from. It's fine saying we've got a complete electric system of railways, so we're not producing any carbon in that sense, but it's where the electricity is generated and in what method. That's important, and no doubt we will get to hear that in due course. One very small matter on page 88, it says that extra services need to be reintroduced to Brooklands Park and Wenham Green, and we understand that the off-peak services are being restored from the 12th of December, so we'll go back to 3 an hour instead of 2 an hour. Very good news.
There we are. You heard it here first. Fantastic. Very good news. Okay, Steve Jarvis.
Yeah, I think three points. The first is I think we need to be clear that it's the County Council's intention not only to ask for cycle storage at stations, but to try and provide the means for people to get to stations. And I mean, as Sharon has said, there's a comprehensive route that leads to Stevenage Station, but that certainly isn't the case in many other stations.
Right.
That's an area where we really need to be doing better to work with the railroad on that. I mean, I have to say, I'm a bit sceptical about the likelihood of a railway from Stevenage to Luton. I suppose it would be nice, but I think the chances of it happening are pretty slim. And I'm rather surprised that in our new and improved lines we include that, but we don't, for example, include doing anything about the capacity limitation that exists between Stevenage and London, where we have a line that is, or at least was until March, full at peak hours, with a substantial amount of development further north, both in Hertfordshire and in Central Bends, and no capacity for expansion. So I'm rather surprised that that isn't one of our key aspirations in section 15, because I think it should be. I know there's been a lot of debate about how that might be achieved, and I don't think we should tell the railway industry how it should be achieved, but I think one of our aspirations ought to be that there is scope for additional capacity, essentially between Stevenage and Welwyn Garden City.
Okay. Val, do you want to come back on any of those?
Well, just to just pick on the point Stephen raised about the carbon neutral and where does the electricity come from. I mean, yes, absolutely. You know, we're a little way off finding out a lot more about that, but it is obviously, if we are going to be carbon neutral, the electricity does need to be generated in such a manner that that's achievable. And then there are also obviously other sort of developments looking at possible other sort of energy for trains, particularly around freight, which may be looking at sort of things like hydrogen. But again, there's some way in the future, so we'll obviously be keeping an eye on that. Steve's point about how do cyclists get to stations, absolutely, and we will continue to work with the rail operators to encourage them to implement station travel plans and look at the first and last mile. We've added that section into the strategy because it is so important, so we will continue to look at that, and that is something that obviously as a county council we can have influence over if it's on highway. And the capacity issues on the East Coast Main Line, yes, I mean, we are aware that that is an issue. We have sort of highlighted the fact that it is an issue in the strategy without sort of coming up with a solution for that. It's hoped that the digital signalling will go some way to improving the situation, but we will obviously again have to wait and see what happens around that. But that has at least been sort of brought forward, the work on the digital signalling on that bit of the line.
Okay, thank you. John Hale.
Thank you, Chair. I was just a little bit concerned about the lack of detail in this document on freight. There is one section in here, 3.6, which I find is internally inconsistent, and it says that they support the transfer of more freight from road to rail, but then they say this must not be at the expense of passenger services. And we've just been hearing about how we're at capacity, so the only way you could transfer more freight from road to rail would be at the extent of passenger services. I hope this is something that will be looked at in future iterations of this, and whether we do need to be saying more about the ability or otherwise of our rail network to handle more freight.
Yeah, I think that's alluded to in improvement of the freight corridors. So the West Coast Main Line and to a lesser extent the East Coast are taking freight movements from Felixstowe, which ought to go another way around. Okay, we'll take your point, and that one's noted as well. I don't see any other hands. So once again, I'm going to ask members just to indicate in the chat function, please, that they are happy to endorse the adoption of the rail strategy as a supporting document to the local transport plan. Right, thank you very much. We'll try and speed up a bit, I think, if we can. Item 7, infrastructure delivery to support growth in Hertfordshire. Just to say to the panel, I did think about just circulating this as an information item, but I thought it's quite important to put some of this into the public domain, just as an indication of the direction of travel as we review our toolkit, etc. So I think we'll just have a brief introduction. Now, who is going to do this? Because I believe...
I'm going to do it, Chair.
Sorry?
Mark.
Hello,
I'm going
Mark.
to do it, Chair.
Okay,
Hello.
just a quick introduction, Mark.
Yeah, very, very quickly, sir. And as you were just about to note, apologies because Sarah is unwell, so unable to join us. So any technical questions might need to be referred back, and we'll get feedback to the panel as soon as we can. This is just a paper to identify that the toolkit, which identifies the amount of money that we need to help support the infrastructure required to support development as it comes forward, is being reviewed. It was last reviewed in 2008, so that's a long time ago, and we're currently going through the process of reviewing it, benchmarking with neighbours, etc., etc. The paper identifies some of the challenges that we're facing, and is really suggesting that our next step is to go to our planning authority colleagues and to get them to voice their opinions on where we are, with a view to then coming back to you in February with a more detailed document to take out to consultation straight after that.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. And so this is an interim, and there are a number of, most people on this panel, I think, sit on planning authorities. So it's just an indication of the direction of travel here. And I did think it was important to get into the public domain, but I'm not sure we want a big debate today. But I'm happy to answer any queries or questions if anybody has actually wants to put their hand up. And Hang on, I'm just catching up here. We've got Steve Jarvis, then Jane West.
Yes, I appreciate we don't want to lengthy debate on this. I think when we last looked at this, there were some areas of the council's operations that were not as far forward as others in terms of identifying what their needs might be. I think adult care services, for example, were not as advanced as some of the other areas. Is that something that we expect to see resolved by the time we get the next draft? And I guess the other observation was that, based upon the numbers included, it's clear that the level of infrastructure funding being collected, even in the districts where it's highest, is about half what it should be.
Probably right. I think the answer to that is yes. They will be further forward because we want to get to the final position next time round. Mark, do you want to say anything else?
No, you've answered it, Councillor.
Good. Jane West.
Thank you. Can I just ask the question? It's in the 1.2 of the report. I believe some work has already been done on the developer contribution costs, and it says about liaising with the local authorities. But is there any opportunity to share with officers those costs that they've already worked out in contributions on a local level for the districts? Because obviously the districts and the boroughs are already prioritising their local plans and need to clarify, need costing clarification on infrastructure.
I think this is an ongoing iteration on this, Jane. So I don't think any of this will come as a surprise. But Mark.
No, absolutely right, Chair. So no, none of this will come as a surprise, and obviously the intention is to have a more detailed discussion with each of the planning authorities over the next month or so, to then be able to bring something back to panel in February to go out to formal consultation.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, thanks, members. But as I say, it's an update report, but I thought it was important to get it into the public domain. So if there's no other hands, once again, in the chat function, can you indicate, please, if you're happy to support the recommendations of the order paper is to note the current position into infrastructure cost and development viability, and to endorse officer engagement with local authority partners on emerging work, etc., etc. Right, thank you very much, members. We will move on to item 8, authorities monitoring report and local AMR and local aggregate assessment. And I think we've got Emma somewhere to introduce this.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Chair.
Emma. Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'll give a brief update of both reports. They're both statutory documents that we update every year and we have placed onto the County Council's web pages. I'll start with giving updates on the LAA then. So the LAA covers the calendar year of 2019, and it notes that the sales of sand and gravel went up to 1.25 million tonnes as of the end of the year. This is an increase when compared to last year's figure, which was 1.21 million tonnes, and it's actually the highest sales figure that we've had since 2011. It also notes that the reserves of sand and gravel declined, but this is in line with the sales that took place over the year, and also the fact that there were no minerals planning permissions that were determined in 2019 that would have added a supplier to that reserves figure. The LAA also notes that the land bank of sand and gravel as of the end of 2019 is 6.4 years. So whilst this is below the 7-year required minimum as set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, the panel should note that the recently approved application at land adjoining Coopers Green Lane will be added to the figures in next year's LAA, and this will bump up the reserves figure and also bump up the land bank figure back up to above the 7-year required minimum. We took the LAA to the East of England Aggregate Working Party in September this year, and we do this as part of a requirement from the National Planning Policy Framework, which asks that we take into account their advice when we prepare the LAA. So any advice that we received has been implemented into the version that you see before you today. In terms of the AMR, so the AMR states that the County Council will approve 13 minerals and waste planning applications over the period that it covers. 2 of these were for waste and 13 of these were for minerals, and you can see details in Appendix 3 and 4 of these. The AMR is also used to note the progress that we make in reviewing the minerals and waste local plans. It states that the minerals local plan will be subject to a second proposed submission consultation in 2021, and the draft waste local plan will be subject to a consultation at the start of 2021. And details of the local plan reviews can be seen in Part 4 of the AMR. The AMR concludes then that the policies in the adopted plans and the adopted minerals and waste documents continue to remain a sound basis upon which to determine any future applications. Lastly, I'd also like to note that next year's monitoring reports to the LAA and the AMR will be used to set out any information in connection with the coronavirus pandemic. So, for example, next year's LAA, which will cover the calendar year of 2020, will set out any relevant information as to how the pandemic could have affected sand and gravel sales. That brings me to the end of the main updates. Thank you very much. I'd like to hand back over to the panel for any questions.
Thank you very much, Emma. I don't think there's any particular red flags in this report, but I'm happy to take questions from members. But we've to take this report as read, and hopefully people are happy with with the content.
Okay. So, was there any questions?
No, I don't think so, Emma. I think everyone's happy. Thank you very much indeed. And I'll just ask members now to agree the recommendations on the order paper, to note the AMR and the LAA outlined in the report and attached as appendices, and acknowledge both documents to be on the council website. So if you can indicate, please, in chat that you agree those recommendations. And Emma, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rightio, we'll move on to item 9, which is the Sustainable Travel Towns programme, and I'll ask Trevor Mason to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. You recall at the last panel I gave an update on the Sustainable Travel Town programme, but I thought I'd just very briefly remind members of what it's all about. So this is a new programme that was introduced by Local Transport Plan 4, and really is about getting a step change in sustainable transport across the county. And it's about combining all initiatives that we use for sustainable transport. So it's about infrastructure, but it's also about working with behaviour change, planning, enforcement, and all those sorts of issues, and working together and working in a concentrated area in a concentrated period of time. Very much a pilot programme, and we will sort of learn as we go along and develop this. But obviously it's important when we're going to kick off in the first round to develop this. The process we use, we invite bids from all organisations in the county to put forward their ideas, and we received a total of 9 bids, which are set out in 5.1 of the paper. And actually, since the last update, we had a submission from St Albans as well, which is welcome. In analysing, I think the important thing to say is that all the bids have merit. They all actually have good vision on what to drive forward, and the whole purpose of this programme is to get people on board and enthused and work together to deliver that. So on that basis, that's been successful, and in an ideal world we could take all the bids forward and develop them, but obviously we have to recognise that we have limited resources to actually develop these, and therefore we have to shortlist some from the list of 9 that we have. So they've all got technical merit still in different ways, but they're all worthwhile. So on that basis, we decided to add an additional step on the process, which is to ask the district and borough councils, either the ones who are submitting the bids or their bids in their area, to sign up to a set of quite challenging criteria around delivering these programmes, recognising that a lot of the sticks around the programme will be in the control or influence of the district and borough council. So it's really key that they are fully on board with that. So a separate process went out earlier this year. We've had responses from all of the district and borough councils. In fact, they all want to stay in the programme and they all support it in principle. But on the responses received, both Stevenage and North Herts district councils went that extra step further and really explained how they wanted to deliver this and in detail how they could deliver the criteria. So although all districts support this, Stevenage and North Herts stand out as the ones who say have gone an extra bit further in demonstrating they want to deliver sustainable trams and be at the start of the programme. So on that basis, the office recommendation is that in the first stage, we take forward both Stevenage and Letchworth into the next round. Having said that, I do need to make a comment because since the paper was published, I've had queries raised about that criteria table, and looking at it again, there's actually an error in that the assessment for Royston should actually be the same as Letchworth. North Herts support for both towns is the same, and it was an error on our part in terms of interpreting that letter. So I have to point out that actually the North Herts support for both is the same for Royston as Letchworth. So that's what I've offered recommendations. I think another key point to know is that any town that's agreed to go in the programme at this stage will provisionally. We will work up with successful bidders a detailed action plan and have a sort of full memorandum of understanding with the district and borough council about delivering the measures, and we'll review that in the summer. And if that's okay, they'll go forward. But if we can't get detailed action plans agreed on, actually the current successful bidders could fall out of the programme, and then we potentially look at the reserves from the other 7. Also, we're keen to continue working with any unsuccessful bidders at this stage in terms of continuing to develop the bids for future rounds of the programme. I mean, the overall aspiration obviously is that all towns in Hertfordshire are a sustainable travel town eventually, but obviously we have to prioritise that in terms of programme. So that's the paper. So the recommendation there is it recommends taking forward Stevenage and Letchworth, but I'll just remind you the issue around Royston, but also recommends that this is a provisional programme until the summer would get detailed action plan, and that we offer all the unsuccessful bidders further meetings to carry on working with them to develop the bids for potential future rounds of the programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. I'm open to any comments from members. This is quite a challenging programme, actually. I'm still not convinced that anyone is actually going to come up with a programme that gets them over the line, but we'll see how we get on. Any contributions from anybody? Okay, Asif, you were first, and then Steve.
Thank you, and can I just congratulate the ones that have won the bid? Can I just ask about?
Well, they haven't won the bid; they've been provisionally included.
Okay, they've been provisionally included. They've gone to the next stage. Is that accurate, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'd like to ask about is those in particular Watford that hasn't got through to the next stage. And when I was speaking to some officers, they did mention that they, perhaps a little bit of misunderstanding about the criteria, very tied up in terms of other COVID-related issues. And they just want to know if they can get another fair crack at the whip of trying to get their bid in. Watford is one of these unique towns, similar to Stevenage, where you have sustainable transport systems in place or getting there, and just another way of looking at and working with Watford in particular, such that it doesn't miss out.
Okay, thanks, Asif. But just hold that for a minute. I'll take Steve next, and then we'll ask Trevor to respond.
Okay. Well, I suspect that we may get a lot of points of that sort raised. I mean, the point I'm going to raise, which won't come as a surprise to you, Chair, is that given it's been discovered that Royston got the same score as Letchworth and indeed Stevenage, why has that not changed the officer's recommendation, and how is that going to impact the situation?
Well, Are you seriously telling me Royston Town Council are going to move away from their long-held ambition for free parking in the town centre of Royston? Will I get a letter from the town council saying we're going to start charging for on-street parking?
The town council don't have any on-street parking, but I mean, as you pointed out, clearly this is the start of a process, and we may discover, in case of any of the towns, that actually delivering what's required in order to do this is not achievable, either because there's a lack of will or because it's simply not feasible for some other reason. What I'm inquiring is, having discovered that this stage of the assessment, there was an error made in this stage of the assessment, and that there are actually 3 towns that meet all the criteria. How should that affect our decision?
Okay, I'll hold that for a minute. Graham?
Yeah, I notice Hertford is all green and the other 2 towns in East Herts are white. And I'm trying to understand the rationale behind that. And I'm sure there's a logical answer, but rather than go into detail here, I think maybe pick it up with Trevor outside of this meeting, because it's the same district, if you know what I mean, district borough.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Thank you. Trevor, can you come back?
Yeah, I think there's a general point there to all comments, and as I pointed out, the recommendation includes that we actually offer to continue working with all unsuccessful bids, say for the future rounds of Sustainable Travel Town Programme, and indeed if any of the proposed 2 are unsuccessful come summer and then can't deliver. So I'm very keen that we offer to work with everyone, and certainly, as mentioned, Watford, be very keen to work and develop that even further, and again with all these Herts towns. So the offer will be there to the unsuccessful bidders that we continue dialogue and continue to work up the bids. And so I'm happy to obviously to have, as Graham suggests, individual feedback to anyone about the programme in terms of the assessment and also how we can go forward on that. The Councillor Jarvis's point about the recommendation, obviously that was in the paper that's published. I think my issue there is we probably are limited in terms of the resources in developing these. So to take 3 might we do, but I welcome comments of the panel.
Right. Graham, your hand's still up.
Yeah, I've got another question, Chair.
Go on then. I
was just wondering, Trevor, when would it be January when you would actually be able to sit down and engage with the each applicant, or how soon could it be done?
As soon as the decision it's finally made after this panel, we will write to everyone and make that offer. Happy to do that as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right, thank you, Graham. I don't see any other hands at the moment. Now, Trevor, on the basis that there's been a mistake, if that's the right word, in the interpretation of the criteria here, I mean, I think it would be fair to include Royston. We'll have to handle that. But the first thing I will expect from either the town council or the district council is a commitment to end on-street free parking in Royston. If that comes in, then that immediately raises the priority. But I think it would be fair on the basis of what Trevor has said and what Steve has been saying, that it will be fair to include Royston. And we'll have to deal with the implications of the 3, but I'm sure it can be handled one way or another.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Right. If that is the case, we're looking at the resolutions on the order paper, and under chat, please, if you can please indicate that the panel is asked to endorse the recommended outcome in section 8.3 as follows: A, Letchworth, Stevenage and Royston are provisionally included. B, full entry into the programme for Letchworth, Stevenage, Royston is only confirmed once the detailed action plan has been produced. And as I say, that's quite challenging. And and C, all the other submissions are retained in a pool for possible entry in subsequent rounds of the programme and meetings arranged with promoters. Now, I want to refer back to ASIF. We had some discussions, I think, yesterday on sustainable transport in Watford, and it could well be that to some extent they're ploughing a slightly different furrow towards the same destination. But in the meantime, can we please agree those recommendations that I've just read out from the order paper? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, by a coincidental or brilliant piece of timing, it's now 4 o'clock, and I'm going to call a 5-minute break so everybody can actually make themselves comfortable. And well, let's make it 10 minutes, shall we? Just to make sure that we all got plenty of time. And we'll reconvene at 4:10 with the Sustainable Hertfordshire strategy. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Item 10 is the Sustainable Hertfordshire Strategy Action Plan. I think it's true to say that this is probably one of the most fascinating areas of work any of us are going to be involved in over the next few years. And we're just really at the start line. I'll just introduce Julie Greaves, Head of Sustainability, who's been working like a Trojan on this over the last recent period. I don't think that's an acceptable description these days, is it? Working like a Trojan. Julie's going to give us a short presentation. You've got the papers there, which I hope everybody has read. Some of you may have seen this through other panels, but as I say, we're just getting to the start line on this, and this is going to be an area of work that is really going to develop with some pace, I think, in the years ahead. Julie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. As Derek has said, you've got papers in front of you. You've got the panel paper itself and then the appendices, and I'll just take you through the appendices via this PowerPoint presentation. So in terms of just a bit of an update of how we've got to where we've got to, as you are aware, the County Council unveiled its new corporate plan and also declared a climate emergency last July. And alongside that climate emergency declaration, there was a commitment to prepare the Sustainable Hertfordshire strategy. That strategy was approved at Cabinet this March, and then another commitment made that we would develop a detailed action plan to identify how we were going to deliver on that strategy. The strategy itself sets out 3 areas of influence in terms of a leader in our own operations, enabling others through our policies and programmes, and then more widely than that, inspiring all of our businesses, residents and stakeholders to make a difference so that we can really make a greater difference through those different influences. So the action plan that you have in front of you at Appendix A has lots of actions in it, and I have to say we had full engagement from every single part of the authority, from all service areas, and we had over 400 individual actions put forward for consideration. All of those actions needed to be looked at very carefully. We needed to assess them and look at them in terms of consistency and also review them in terms of the language that was being used, check for any duplications, and then summarise them and put them into more high-level groupings. And that's why we've got over 200 actions that are being taken through the panel process at the moment. And those actions are categorised in Appendix A as quick wins, which we can deliver within existing resources, and they are identified in pages 7 to 12 and 27 within Appendix A. Key works programmes, which are subject to further investigation, so we want to develop those over the next 1 to 5 years, and they're set out in pages 13 to 24 and 27 to 30 of Appendix A. And then future works programmes, and these are quite large areas of work that need to be fully scoped to understand the level of investment needed and also the level of carbon impact that they may have. And these are set out in pages 24 to 26 and 31 and 32 of Appendix A. And then for completeness, there's an appendix to the action plan, which also highlights and identifies all of the actions that we're already doing and we will continue to do as business as usual. And then Appendix B to the report is the web-based version, and this reads very much differently to the detailed action plan. It has less detail in it, it's very high level, and it's hoped that this is more easily read version of the action plan, with the thoughts that this would be put alongside the strategy on the County Council's web pages that are specifically relating to Sustainable Hertfordshire. In terms of the 200 actions listed, we have identified some that need to be developed as a priority, and these are 19 enabling actions, and they are duplicated at pages 4 to 6. And the reason we've highlighted these actions is because we need to develop these as a matter of urgency to be able to then deliver further actions that are identified within the plan. Each of the actions has been attributed to a lead portfolio, and this is it to ensure that we can identify somebody who is responsible for the delivery of these actions and that we can report back on the delivery of those actions to that portfolio area. So the presentations that I've given to each panel have focused on their actions that are attributable attributable to them, but clearly a lot of these actions will need collaboration across all of the services. So in terms of actions specifically relating to growth infrastructure planning and the economy, there are a number of them that relate specifically to planning and the planning system. In terms of quick wins, we want to make sure we influence the carbon assessment tools around Section 106 and community infrastructure levy and also DFE funding to make sure we are asking for the right amount of money to be able to deliver carbon neutral infrastructure and new build. And that also links into the guide for developer contributions that we were talking about earlier. We are also continuing to work with district and borough councils on a number of infrastructure requirements, including electric vehicles, for example, and the planning of those. Again, relating to planning, talking about flood risks and sustainable urban drainage systems, and looking at making sure that local plans and supplementary planning documents do have sustainability checklists and climate change policies. And then also looking at other campaigns, for example, around anti-idling in terms of the requirements that fit within this portfolio, and also with highways and environment. We're also very much pursuing a circular economy, and that's via our planning system again, and also through such things as when we are the planning authority and determining authority for our own applications. And again, relating to minerals local plan requirements and also waste local plan requirements, and also updating building futures to make sure that that is current and up to date in terms of sustainability and climate change. So moving on to key works programmes, these are the ones that we were seeking to deliver over the next 1 to 5 years. We've got there around adapting any investments we make to make sure that they are ready for future climates, looking to work through the Hertfordshire Climate Change and Sustainability Partnership to make sure that the developments that we're pursuing with our district and borough colleagues are ready for future climates and also carbon neutral, and also looking at, for example, park and ride schemes for our own staff and wider. Some further ones, looking at green bank options to try and mobilise private investment, again working with key stakeholders across the authority to look at flood procedures and any other emergency procedures that might be needed due to future severe weather climates. And then again working with district and borough councils to make sure that we focus on air quality and actually implementing the air quality strategy across all of the county. We're also looking at checklists, as I said, in terms of validation of plan applications, and that would not only be for ourselves, but for others in terms of district and borough council colleagues. Training for district and borough colleagues on circular economy, and obviously working with the local enterprise partnership to bring in businesses as well. There are also lots of actions that require engagement with every other portfolio area, and so we'll need the support from growth infrastructure planning and economy, and there's just a few that have been highlighted there in terms of relating to plan applications, raising awareness via education and communications campaigns, looking at opportunities for renewables and pursuing biodiversity where we can, particularly biodiversity net gains, and then looking at travel plans and also general principles across paperless office and smart worker. In terms of timeline, so I have been presenting the Sustainable Hertfordshire Strategy Action Plan to all of the panels, and I have got 2 more panels to go after this one. And then all the feedback from those, all of the feedback from those panels will be shared with Cabinet so that they can review the recommendations and then hopefully go towards County Council, and that's 14th and 15th of December. You do have some very detailed recommendations in the paper, so I won't go through those. I'll let you go through those, Derek, in terms of the recommendations, because they are fairly detailed after we've had time for questions and debate. Just to say that's come out from the other panels, we know there are concerns with regard to funding, and we are looking at lots of different opportunities and options with regard to funding, which might be via bonds or grants or loans, and lobbying central government for more investments, and also pursuing the decarbonisation agenda and decarbonisation funds. So we are looking at how we're going to finance all of these works. There is a specific concern that's been raised at the panels about monitoring and reporting, and that's something that we do need to bottom out. We'd like to be able to monitor all of the actions. We know that that's going to be a bit of a task, and we're working with colleagues in data team to come up with a dashboard for how we can monitor delivery of the actions, and also the overarching strategy ambitions to be able to feed back to the relevant portfolio holders and panels with regard to those actions. And just to clarify again about Hertfordshire Climate Change and Sustainability Partnership, we're working very closely with all 10 district borough councils and the LEP, and that links into also with Hert's growth board work around the corridors and any prospectuses or policies that they may will be submitting to government for their growth bids. Thank you.
All right, Julie, thank you very much. Could you circulate that brief presentation to everybody?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. As I said, this is a very challenging area, particularly funding, and I'm always particularly challenged by the circular economy arguments, which I think is always getting your head around some of that is quite tricky. Okay, we'll open it up for comments and debate, and I've got Sharon Taylor, then Steve Jarvis.
Thank you very much, Chair, and of course I really welcome this report. It's very comprehensive, and I just want to say a big hat tip to Julie, who's doing all of the panel meetings, because this paper has to go to every panel, and I was at Resources and Performance yesterday. I'm not going to repeat all the things I said there because that'd be tedious for Julie, as well as the rest of us probably, but I did just want to pick up on two of the things with a slight different angle to the one that Julie said. First of all, on the funding issue, I do think all of us have to continue to lobby government for appropriate funding streams, and potentially the Shared Prosperity Fund when it or wherever it appears, to tackle some of the climate change issues. There isn't enough money in the local government system to deal with some of these issues. And, you know, the little pots of funding that we all bid into and we're able to do a little bit at a time is not going to tackle this issue by 2050, never mind 2030, which is what we're all trying to aim at. So I do think we have to do, all of us, whatever we can to lobby governments and politicians of all stripes on this issue. The second point was around the monitoring and the reporting of this. We did discuss this at RMP yesterday. And my view is very strongly there's a huge public interest in this, and it ought to be for the sake of transparency and accountability to the public, particularly our young people who are very interested in these issues. It ought to be done somewhere where, as we've all now adapted to, you know, people can tune in and see the discussion about progress on these matters. So whether it's a cabinet panel or however we do it, it ought to be something that's done in public, not there was a suggestion around a mag yesterday, but I would rather we did this somewhere where it's the public can look in and see the progress that's being made. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Sharon. I think this is an area where over the years we need to keep our oven ready list on the table, because experience has shown you never quite know when there's going to be a pot of money suddenly appear when somebody's found something in the bottom drawer. So we need to have things ready to go. Okay, Steve Jarvis.
Thank you, Derek. I mean, as Sharon has said, this is a comprehensive report with a lot in, and some of this we've talked about it in other panels already. So to make just, I think, 3 points. The first is, whilst I understand what we're trying to say, I'm a bit concerned about labelling one of the sections as business as usual, because actually we can't carry on in the way that it has been usual if we're going to achieve the sort of sustainability targets that we're aiming to do. So the business as usual tasks actually involve some significant amount of change in things that we may already be doing, but we need to do in different ways. And I think it's important, not only from the point of view of how members and officers see it, but also the way in which the public perceive what we're doing, that we don't actually get into the habit of talking about business as usual in relation to the sustainability changes. The second point, and this is one that I've made before, but I'll make again, I think we need to be clear about our non-property related emissions, and I think from what I can see, we don't have a good enough plan yet for capturing what those are as a first step towards doing something about it. And particularly in terms of this panel's areas, I didn't see any of the things highlighted that related to reduce low emission transport, for example, in terms of bus services. And there's some mention of park and ride, but there are some both positive and negative impacts from park and ride from a carbon point of view. So I think that's an area around, they're not related to property, they're related to other issues. And finally, in terms of monitoring, I mean, I agree completely with Sharon that it does need to be done in public. And I think that it needs to be done actually at several levels. There's a need for the individual panels to look at, excuse me, my dog's decided to intervene. There's a need to look at the panel specific issues, but there's also need to have an overview across the organisation as a whole. Because we're not going to achieve these objectives unless the whole organisation works on them. And there are many that actually cross portfolio and directorate boundaries where people need to have an overall view of the position.
Thank you, Steve. Agree with that. And I think, next year when there's going to be a whole raft of new members, both in district and county level, we probably need to have something under our partnership umbrella specifically on this subject, a conference next summer or something like that. Anyway, Julie, do you want to come back on any of that while I get the lights back on?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. In terms of Sharon's points, yes, we know that we will continue to lobby government, and thank you for saying that. And I completely understand that there is a lot of public interest and also interest from young people, and we're trying to develop some communication mechanisms specifically for young people. We've been very hampered by COVID with regard to communication with schools in particular, but that's certainly something we are hoping to be able to pursue earlier in the new year. We have a specific comms plan relating to Sustainable Hertfordshire and also to young people and schools, so we will continue to pursue that. In terms of the labelling of Steve, your comment about business as usual, that is a very, very good point, because we may need to adapt some of those business areas to make sure they are climate change compliant or adapt them. So I'll have a look back over that list and just double check whether or not we can maybe name it something else other than business as usual, or caveat it in terms of adaptation. So thank you for that. You raised the issue around non-property emissions and low emissions vehicles at some of the other panels as well. There are some actions relating to the delivery of low carbon transport, and that falls in a number of different portfolio areas, specifically resources and performance where it relates to our own staff, and then highways and environment where it relates to highways, and then for ourselves in terms of growth, infrastructure and planning, where we can influence the planning system. So it does fit in with a lot of different portfolio areas. And in terms of monitoring of emissions, as I said in the previous panel meeting, we are working with our district and borough colleagues to try and get to grips with scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, so that we do have a county-wide picture of all of those 3 scopes. And I completely appreciate that we need to understand our own house, as in HCC, before we then look at others. So that's something that is highlighted within the action plan. So thank you. And Derek Asif's got his hand up as well.
Yeah. Okay, Julie, thanks for that. Asif, I'll take you, then I'd like to move on if you can, because I'd like to finish by 5. Asif.
No, thank you. Very briefly, I think also the supply chain needs to be mentioned in that. So when we're looking at that, regularly coaches and buses in our transport that go out from elsewhere. So I think that's key in terms of any contracts that the county council puts out, that it does put that within that as a means of maintaining that. So not necessarily HCC by itself, it's also the supply chain that it uses.
Absolutely. And supply chain issues are recognised in the action plan as well. We talk about not only our own procurement processes, but also influencing others in terms of sustainability criteria through their procurement processes as well. And that certainly relates to lots of different areas of transport, buses and also taxis.
Thank you very much. And all right, thank you members for contributions. Turning to the order paper, we have a series of resolutions which I shall read for the benefit of anybody else who may be tuned in. The panel asked to recommend to Cabinet that it notes Appendix A to the action plan as a list of actions to continue to embed climate change and sustainability into business as usual. Agree the actions identified as quick wins to be delivered within existing resources to progress and enable the subsequent actions in later sections of the plan. Agree that further investigations be undertaken into the actions identified as key works programs, bracket actions subject to further investigation as they may require significant investment over the next 5 to 10 years, and that these should be progressed as a matter of urgency to enable future work programs and decision making. Agree the actions identified as future work programs be subject to further scoping to fully understand the cost and potential carbon impact of implementing these actions. Agree the proposal to run a pilot scheme at an initial sum of 1.45 million to review options for moving heating in schools towards electrical options. Request that officers update the most appropriate panel, I suppose, or panels, or it could be, in spring 2021. And in total, the attached plan be approved for service areas to implement where within existing budgets and return to future cabinets where approval is needed for additional resources in order to meet the Sustainable Hertfordshire strategy ambitions. There's quite a lot there, but I thought it'd be appropriate to read through it. Members, if you can indicate through the chat function your agreement to those recommendations. Right, thank you very much, colleagues. We'll move on to item 11, local transport plan delivery. Sorry. Agreed. Local transport plan delivery programme and infrastructure investment and sustainable transport fund. This is the sustainable transport fund that we set up some time ago to work up schemes to a sort of oven ready status, and we're now making some considerable progress in deploying these resources. Rupert. Is Rupert with us? Rupert, are you with us? Teresa, do you know if Rupert's here or Mark?
Derek, he does appear to be here.
Is Mark still with us?
Let's check.
Rupert's still connected, Chair.
Yeah.
He maybe expected Julie to go on for a bit longer.
Well, he should have gone for his cup of tea at 4 o'clock. Okay. Can we try and make contact?
I'm just doing that now, Derek.
Thank you very much, Teresa. You've got his phone number, Teresa.
I've just spoken to him on the phone. He's got an IT issue. He's just closing it down and he's frozen.
Oh, right. Okay.
So he should be doing his best to get back in. He's been frozen.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair, while we're waiting, can I just ask you a question about your additional recommendation that came out yesterday?
Yes.
Are you referring to the, when you're referring to the North and South Central and Eastern growth and transport plans, is that the ones that are going through the HGB, or is that are these internal HCC plans?
These are the these are the subsets of the local transport plan, which puts more meat on the bones. It's nothing to do with the north, east and southwest groupings.
No, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Derek, can you hear me now?
Yes. Rupert, how are you?
I'm all right now, thanks. I was panicking a bit there.
Now we're aiming to finish by 5, so
I'll keep
let you introduce this and we'll canter through it.
So I'm just trying to find the file now. It's shut that down as well that I was following the agenda with. 2 seconds. So anyway, this is an update on the local transport plan delivery programme, as well as the Sustainable Transport Infrastructure Fund bids and submissions that have been included to the £2 million fund that's been administered by your portfolio, Derek. Correct. So there's an update on the 10 priority schemes that we've got in identified at the moment, and good progress has been made on those. And then I've set out the funding that has been provided to a series or a number of projects within the county aimed at improving sustainable transport measures in line with LTP4 to get them primarily ready to a point where we're able to bid into either government pots, utilise Section 106, work with developers to promote sustainable transport projects going forward. Yep. I'm happy to take any questions on it while I look for the paper.
All right, thank you, Rupert. It's fairly straightforward paper. As you say, I think we're making some progress here in moving some of these projects forward. So I'm happy to take questions from members. I've got Richard Smith, first of all.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got a very small question for Rupert. Page 5, item 6.3 is described as further bids have been submitted and are being processed for the following.
Yes.
So I'm interested in cycle connectivity, Highways B197 corridor, which is in my backyard, and then the so-called highways cycling and walking infrastructure. My interest is that I've actually committed some of my HLB, and the PCC has also committed a sum of money to certain projects along the B197. What I'd like to do is ask you, Rupert, if you can arrange to send me information about those schemes.
We certainly can, Richard, and I would add that this is in addition to that, so that we can complete the study along the length of the corridor.
Good.
So the funding that yourself and the PCC have put in is quite isolated in relation to the locations along the 197. And what we're trying to do is develop a corridor strategy aligned to the Highways England Smart Motorway project to put us in a good position to be able to bid for one of their designated fund pots, of which we're waiting for the absolute detail on those. But the understanding is that there will be pots of funding available for us to bid to support things like walking, cycling, air quality improvements on corridors that are parallel to their strategic road network.
Thank you very much.
Connectivity between Welwyn Garden City and Stevenage and beyond longer term.
All right, Richard. Okay, Steve Jarvis.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed in 6.2 there's an item for countryside rights of way strategic active travel network. I know there was some work that was done on that, looking at which parts of the rights of way network could be used for travel rather than recreation. But my understanding was that that had come to an end because the funding had run out. Is this the funding that was spent last year, or is this to continue that activity, which seemed to me to be worthwhile continuing?
What's identified in there, and I'm sorry, I'm working a little bit blind at the moment because I still haven't got to the papers, but what's in there includes the initial bid that was submitted and the work that has been undertaken to date. But my understanding is a further bid is being put in to enable the continuation of some of that work.
Okay, thanks so much.
Was the 50,000 used to leverage the scheme with Sustrans?
I think part of it was, Derek. Yes.
Yeah.
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 So you
Okay.
did a lot of other things as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Rupert. Thanks, Steve. Any other contributions from anybody? Steve, you still got your hand up. Okay. Thank you. I think it's a useful update actually, because we've had this fund in existence for a little while now, and I'm very pleased to see that we are actually committing the resources here to start working up all these schemes, or at least getting to a point where they are deliverable, which was the purpose of the scheme. So I'm very happy with this report. Now, if there's no other indications of anybody who wishes to speak, we've got some recommendations on the order paper, again via chat. Just to note the progress made developing the priority schemes, note the funding wall from the ISTF and likely future bids. And number 3, which is an additional one, note that the LDPDP we reviewed once the North and South, Central and Eastern Growth and Transport Plans have been adopted. Now, these transport plans are a subset of the local transport plan, which I think members have seen, but these are the plans that put a lot of meat on the bones of the overall local transport plan and make it much more localised. And we've got a number of groupings across the county. And I think basically we need to see what comes out of those plans once they've been adopted. But so that's just really a bit of a belt and braces, number 3. Okay, if everybody is happy with that, please can we note in the chat function the agreement with those 3 recommendations. Right, well, thank you very much, members. I'm not aware of any other business. Can I thank everyone for their attendance and contributions this afternoon, and look forward to a meeting in the new year. Whether we should be together in person or not by then, I doubt, but thank you very much for your contributions and patience this afternoon, and thank the officers once again for their presentations. And I know this is all a bit stressful a lot of the time, but unfortunately, it's the world we live in. But thank you very much indeed. I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.